a religious person, but you can't do both. And if you try to do both, you're straddling two sides of the fence and probably aren't doing justice to neither. Here's what Daniel Dennett has to say in his book, Darwin's Dangerous Idea. He says, almost no one is indifferent to Darwin, and no one should be. The Darwinian theory is a scientific theory and a great one, but that's not all it is. The creationists who oppose it so bitterly are right about one thing. Darwin's dangerous idea cuts much deeper into the fabric of our most fundamental beliefs than many of its sophisticated apologists have yet admitted, even to themselves. So the idea is that if you buy into the Darwinian theory or the neo-Darwinian synthesis, that it's going to eat away at any sort of traditional religious belief. Or here's what Richard Dawkins has to say. He says, it is absolutely safe to say that if you meet somebody who claims not to believe in evolution, that person is ignorant, stupid, or insane, or wicked, but I'd rather not consider that. Wasn't that sweet of him? Core belief number 2 is that faith is a superstitious blind leap based on the denial of evidence. So that's the definition of faith. Blind leap based on the denial of evidence. Dawkins put it this way: faith is the great cop-out, the great excuse to evade the need to think and evaluate evidence. Faith is belief in spite of, even perhaps because of, the lack of evidence. And sadly, many Christians seem to think that's the case. Many times when a Christian is challenged by a skeptic, or perhaps a Sunday school leader, or a pastor or deacon, or just a friend of yours would perhaps ask a question, the response too often is, well, you just have to believe, you just have to have faith. When what they're asking is, why should I have faith? The answer to why should I have faith cannot be just have faith. Third core belief is that religion is inherently evil, that religion does harm, that the world would be better off without religion. Here's the way Nobel Prize-winning physicist Steven Weinberg put it. With or without religion, you would have good people doing good things and evil people doing evil things. But for good people to do evil things, that takes religion. His physicist counterpart, Freeman Dyson, noted that for bad people to do good things, that also takes religion. Christopher Hitchens put it this way: organized religion is violent, irrational, intolerant, allied to racism and tribalism and bigotry, invested in ignorance and hostile to free inquiry, contemptuous of women and coercive toward children. Or here's what Richard Dawkins has to say. Revealed faith is not harmless nonsense. It can be lethally dangerous nonsense. Dangerous because it gives people unshakable confidence in their own righteousness. Dangerous because it gives them false courage to kill themselves, which automatically removes normal barriers to killing others. And dangerous because we have all bought into a weird respect which uniquely protects religion from normal criticism. Let's now stop being so damn respectful. Or the next slide, which says it very strongly. Some propositions are so dangerous that it may even be ethical to kill people for believing them. So those are their core beliefs. What are their characteristic practices? Well, number one, they have a superficial knowledge of the Bible. Now, every atheist that I've ever met has read the Bible. They tell me so. The first thing they say is, oh, I've read the Bible. I know the Bible. And many of them have read the Bible to the extent that they can go through and cherry pick some problem passages for us, some difficult text. And there are some difficult places in the Bible. The Bible even says there are difficult places in Scripture. But they don't genuinely have a knowledge of the Bible, at least in most cases. I'll give you a story, an example of this. Our third Greer Hurd Forum was on the future of atheism, and we had Daniel Dennett and Alistair McGrath debate the question. And we had other good speakers like William Lane Craig and Paul Copan. But that evening, Saturday evening, after the event was over, I went out to dinner with Alistair McGrath and Daniel Dennett and a few other people, and we went to a really nice restaurant. We went to one of Emerald's restaurants. Yes, be jealous. But anyway, over dinner, Dennett was thanking me for how kind we had been, how wonderfully Southern Baptists had treated him. I don't know what he thought Southern Baptists were going to do. I think being from the Boston area, he probably thought that when we drove onto campus, there would be 200 rednecks lined up with 201 shotguns waiting for him. But he found out that Baptists do not believe in religious coercion, but we do believe in persuasion and conversation. And he was just thanking me profusely, and I said, well, Dan, I really am an evangelical Christian, and I really would like to see everybody give their life to Jesus, even you. At which point he went off on a soliloquy about how he was a Darwinist before he was an atheist. And he was an atheist because he thought Darwinism logically led to atheism. But he understood that there were many different ideas about the man Darwin, and he said, I'm not interested in the quest of the historical Darwin. I just want everybody to read Darwin's books, see his brilliance, understand his theory, so forth. Then he said, why can't you Christians be that way about Jesus? And I said, well, Dan, because it was Jesus who said, I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes unto the Father but by me. And the look in his eyes was like one if I'd taken out a 2x4 and hit him between the eyes. That's in the Bible. Now, that's probably one of the 10 best-known verses in the Bible. But here he did not know that, even though he had already assured me he'd read the Bible. They are theological novices. Not only are they biblical novices, they're theological novices. Now, it's hard to be a theological expert without being a biblical expert, without having read the Bible and understanding it fairly well. But they don't have right ideas about theology. They typically will attack straw men. It annoys me to no end how frequently Richard Dawkins will say publicly that Christianity is well represented by Westboro Baptist Church, that sort of thing. And if you don't know, they're the people that protest the funerals of servicemen and go around with signs that say God hates fags and so forth. I don't think that's mainline traditional Orthodox Christianity. Well, here's what Terry Eagleton has to say. Now, Eagleton is not one of the new atheists. He is a critic of the new atheist. He is not an evangelical Christian. He's a liberal Catholic, and he is one of the world's most renowned literary critics and professor of literary theory. But this is from a review he had in the London Review of Books of Richard Dawkins' book, The God Delusion. And he says, imagine someone holding forth on biology whose only knowledge of the subject is the Book of British Birds. And you have a rough idea of what it feels like to read Richard Dawkins on theology. Well, here's a non-Christian. I believe he's an agnostic. He says publicly that he leans in that direction, that there is no God. Oliver Burkeman, who writes for The Guardian newspaper in England, here's what he writes. God, in short, isn't one very impressive thing among many things that might or might not exist. not just some especially resplendent object among all the objects illuminated by the light of being. Rather, God is the light of being itself, the answer to the question of why there's existence to begin with. In other words, that wisecrack about how atheists merely believe in one less God than theists do, though it makes a funny line in a Tim Minchin song, is just a category error. Monotheism's God isn't like one of the Greek gods, except that he happens to have no friends. It's an utterly different kind of concept. Their third characteristic practice is that they're primarily irreligious, especially anti-Christian and anti-Muslim. And I think that makes some sense. I think it's understandable because atheism is almost always, if not always, a contextual sort of unbelief. And so frequently I will ask atheists that I talk to, will you describe for me the God that you don't believe in? And frequently they will describe a God that I don't believe in either. But let's look at some of their let's look at some criticism here. Now this is written by a secularist, a non-Christian. Greg Epstein is actually the, quote, secular chaplain, unquote, at Harvard University. And this is from an article that he wrote for the Washington Post. While atheism is the lack of belief in any God, anti-theism means actively seeking out the worst aspects of faith in God and portraying them as representative of all religion. Anti-theism seeks to shame and embarrass people away from religion, browbeating them about the stupidity of belief in a bellicose God. And that's from his article, Less Anti-Theism, More Humanism. Next, they are materialist. Now, when I say they're materialist, I don't mean like the old Madonna song, living in a material world and I am a material girl. I mean that they believe that all the realities that exist are physical realities. No minds, no God, no angels, no spirits, no souls, that sort of thing. Thoroughly material world. If something exists, it exists physically and can be known and measured by the scientific method. Frequently, we will refer to that belief that anything of reality, any real thing, can be known by the scientific method as scientism. So let's take up some questions. Question number one, does science or Darwin disprove God? Does science or Darwin disprove God? Well, apparently not. Here is a list of believing scientists, and it's like the Hall of Fame of Western science. Copernicus, Galileo, Kepler, Newton, Pasteur, Boyle, Raleigh, Fleming, Maxwell, Faraday, Kelvin, Stokes, Mendel, to name just a few of this list, and this list is just a few of the names of scientists who have believed in God throughout history. If you take the believing scientist out, we don't have any history of science. Here's what the late agnostic paleontologist professor from Harvard, Stephen Jay Gould, had to say on the subject. To say it for all my colleagues and for the umpteenth millionth time, science simply cannot, by its legitimate methods, adjudicate the issue of God's possible superintendence of nature. We neither affirm nor deny it. We simply cannot comment on it as scientists. Either half my colleagues are enormously stupid, or the science of Darwinism is fully compatible with conventional religious beliefs and equally compatible with atheism, thus proving that the two great realms of nature's factuality and the source of human morality do not strongly overlap. And that's in a review of an intelligent design book by Philip Johnson. And Gould savages this book. It is a very anti-intelligent design book review. But he does make this point, that you can be a good scientist, even believing in Darwinism, and still be a Christian or a non-Christian. Well, many of them would say, well, that's fine to put up all those scientists from the past, but if they had known what we now know, they wouldn't have been theists. They wouldn't have been believers. Well, let's look to one of the most significant scientists living today, Francis Collins, who was the second director of the Human Genome Project, who brought it to its conclusion, who is now the director of the National Institute of Health. Collins is a geneticist par excellence. He is the man who identified the gene that causes cystic fibrosis, along with about 10 or 11 other diseases that we are now working on and finding cures for. In many areas of genetic research, Collins's work is the basis by which certain types of cancer are being cured, not put into remission. He is, by anybody's estimation, one of the most important 5 scientists in the world. And here's what he has to say. For quite a while in my 20s, I was a pretty obnoxious atheist. At the age of 27, not because his parents brought him up in church and brainwashed him, spiritual child abuse, at the age of 27, after a good deal of intellectual debating with myself about the plausibility of faith, and particularly with strong influence from C.S. Lewis, I became convinced that this was a decision I wanted to make. And I became by choice a Christian, a serious Christian, who believes that faith is not something that you just do on Sunday, but if it makes any sense at all, it is part of your whole life. It's the most important organizing principle in my life. So apparently you can be a good scientist and also believe in God. Let's take up this question. Does religion poison everything? Well, let's look to what St. Nietzsche has to say on the subject. I hope you know Nietzsche was not a believer. Another Christian concept, no less crazy, has passed even more deeply into the tissue of modernity. The concept of the equality of souls before God. This concept furnishes the prototype of all theories of equal rights. Mankind was first taught to stammer the proposition of equality in a religious context, and only later was it made into morality. Now, in The Will to Power, he is not saying this is a good thing. Nietzsche had sort of a twisted but brilliant mind. Here's what Thomas Crean has to say in his response to Richard Dawkins' book, The God Delusion, in particular, this idea that religion causes people to do evil things. Causes people to do evil things. Still, one point is worth making in answer to the author's claim that religion causes people to do evil things. Insofar as this is true, it has no tendency to show that religion is itself a bad thing, or that its message is false. Love causes people to do evil things. So does patriotism. The love of a man and a woman can lead to unfaithfulness, to the destruction of families, and even to murder. Patriotism can lead to hatred and to the indiscriminate bombing of cities. None of this means that either love or patriotism is a bad thing. It simply means that the weakness of human nature is such that any great object or cause may stir our emotions as to lead us to act against our better judgment. If religion occasions evil as well as good, this is no sign of its falsity, but simply of its power of attraction over human nature. That in the name of religion, good men may do bad things is no argument against religion, unless crimes of passion are arguments against human love. I wish I could have said it that well. I just did say it that well. I read it. But I titled this lecture, Why I Am Not an Atheist. And I have a number of reasons. I've actually had to shorten this lecture. In the seminary, I have all kinds of time because I'm in charge of the classroom to teach this sort of thing. But I'm kind of giving you the greatest hits of this lecture, I hope. So I'm going to give you a few of the reasons why I'm not an atheist or a naturalist. Now, when I say I'm not a naturalist, I don't mean that I hate the animal channel, okay? I don't mean, I'm not talking about even a methodological naturalist, as some scientists may choose to be. What I mean is a metaphysical naturalist. A metaphysical naturalist is one who says that the only realities that exist are natural realities. And of course, as I mentioned earlier, the new atheists are brute materialists. The only real things that exist are physical things that can be known and discovered by the scientific method. So, I'm just going to launch off into this. Why am I not a naturalist? Because naturalism undermines human rationality. Rationality is a good thing. But naturalism undermines reason and rationality by insisting that reason is the result of an organ produced by a random process. But why should we believe that reason is a reliable guide to truth if naturalism is correct? Why should we believe that any theory produced by an organism that is itself produced by a random process is true? Here's what J.B.S. Haldane had to say. Now, he's a British scholar who popularized Darwinism. He was sort of the Carl Sagan or the Richard Dawkins of an earlier age. He was not a Christian. But here's what he has to say in contemplating Darwinism. He says, if my mental processes are determined wholly by the motions of atoms within my brain, I have no reason to suppose that my beliefs are true. And hence, I have no reason to believe that my brain is composed of atoms. Or here's what the atheist philosopher Patricia Churchland says. Boiled down to essentials, a nervous system enables the organism to succeed in the 4 F's: feeding, fleeing, fighting, and reproducing. The principal chore of nervous systems is to get the body parts where they should be in order that the organism may survive. Improvements in sensory motor control confer an evolutionary advantage. A fancier style of representing is advantageous so long as it is geared to the organism's way of life and enhances the organism's chances of survival. Truth, whatever that is, definitely takes the hindmost. Now let me unpack a bit of what she's saying. What she is saying is that it doesn't really matter if your beliefs are true in an evolutionary sense. What matters is if your beliefs make for reproduction or for survival. For instance, I can have two beliefs about snakes. I can believe that some snakes are poisonous, but most types of snakes are not poisonous and therefore can be safely handled. Or I can believe that every snake on this planet is poisonous. Now, the first belief is true. Most types of snakes are not poisonous and can be safely handled. But the more useful belief for my survival would be to believe the false belief that all snakes are poisonous. That would ensure that I would never die by snake bite. Or at least a snake would have to go out of its way to kill me. And that's the point. Here's what the late atheist philosopher Richard Rorty had to say on the matter. The idea that one species of organism is unlike all the others, oriented not just toward its own uncreated prosperity, but toward truth, with a capital T, is as un-Darwinian as the idea that every human being has a built-in moral compass. a conscience that swings free of both social history and individual luck. He says this idea about truth, that's absurd. So naturalism undermines human rationality, but naturalism also undermines human free will. Let me read to you a quote from naturalism.org. Now, I don't believe that the internet is the source of all truth. I don't think Wikipedia is the depository of all knowledge either. But naturalism.org is a legitimate website run by scholars, by Tom Clark, and on its advisory board it has professors and PhDs like Daniel Dennett and Susan Blackmore and a number of faculty at Ivy League universities and so forth. So this is not some lone nut posting on the internet at 3 in the morning in his underwear in his basement while eating Oreos because he doesn't have a life, okay? This is some of their basic tenets. From a naturalistic perspective, there are no causally privileged agents. Nothing that causes without being caused in turn. Human beings act the way they do because of the various influences that shape them, whether these be biological or social, genetic or environmental. We do not have the capacity to act outside the causal connections that link us in every respect to the rest of the world. This means we do not have what many people think of as free will, being able to cause our behavior without our being fully caused in turn. Now, one way that naturalists will try to show that we are physically determined is to show that we can track certain types of reactions in the brain scientifically. And under the right circumstances, with the right conditions and right equipment, we can do certain reactions. We can show, when we look at the brain under the right conditions, we can know if somebody is in a meditative state, or if they're hungry, or if they're dreaming, or if they're having a memory, or if they're lusting, that sort of thing. But all this shows is that our thoughts are processed by our brain, not that our brain causes the thoughts. For instance, you can find the data that corresponds to the PowerPoint program that I'm running at this moment in this computer. What you won't find are the thoughts behind it, because those thoughts are in my mind, not in the instrument that I use to process and communicate those thoughts. So one of the reasons that I'm not a naturalist is that I believe in free will. And everybody else does too, even atheists. When I speak at atheist meetings, I will frequently ask the question, how many of you freely came here tonight? And I'll share with you how I use that later on. Okay, now I have to hurry on. I'm going to go 5 minutes over since Jay took 5 minutes of my time. But he did it in love, with a good motive. Because naturalism undermines morality. It undermines morality. Here's what Michael Ruse and E.O. Wilson have to say. Human beings function better if they are deceived by their genes into thinking that there is a disinterested objective morality binding upon them which all should obey. We help others because it is right to help them and because we know that they are inwardly compelled to reciprocate in equal measure. What Darwinian evolutionary theory shows is that this sense of right and the corresponding sense of wrong feelings we take to be above individual desire and in some fashion outside biology are in fact brought about by ultimate biological processes. So we just function better because our genes fake us out. From a naturalistic perspective, behavior arises out of the interaction between individuals and their environment, not from a freely willing self that produces behavior independently of causal connections. Therefore, individuals don't bear ultimate originative responsibility for their actions. in the sense of being their first cause. Given the circumstances, both inside and outside the body, they couldn't have done other than what they did. Nevertheless, we must still hold individuals responsible in the sense of applying rewards and sanctions so that the range of their behavior stays more or less within the range of what we deem acceptable. This is partially how people learn to act ethically. Naturalism doesn't undermine the need or possibility of responsibility and morality, but it places them within the world as understood by science. Now here's the question. How do you hold people responsible who are not responsible? How can people choose who are not free? And if we aren't free, then why do we call Francis of Assisi a saint and Jeffrey Dahmer a monster? If we aren't free or rational, then why do atheists even write books? It would seem that we're just determined to believe what we're determined to believe. Another reason I'm not a naturalist, because naturalism undermines human relationality. If our actions are the result of biochemical causes or social, psychological causes, then what is love? Why does your husband or wife, boyfriend or girlfriend love you? Why do you love your significant other? Does he or she do so freely? Do you? Not in a naturalist world. Not in a world that the new atheists posit, where everything is material and we're shaped by physical, biochemical, social, psychological causes. It seems then that love is in our genes, not our pants, our genetics. But so is mental illness. In a naturalist world, love and mental illness are roughly on the same scale. Another reason I'm not a naturalist is because naturalism cannot explain human consciousness. And, that sense of I-ness that you have. Here's what Dawkins has to say on the matter. Neither Steven Pinker, another atheist that he was dialoguing in this event, neither Pinker nor I can explain human subjective consciousness, what philosophers call qualia. In How the Mind Works, Stephen elegantly sets out the problem of subjective consciousness and asks where it comes from and what's the explanation. Then he's honest enough to say, beats the heck out of me. That is an honest thing to say, and I echo it. We don't know. We don't understand it. Well, it is honest, but it's not helpful. Here's what another atheist, Ned Block, has to say. We have no conception of our physical or functional nature that allows us to understand how it could explain our subjective experience. In the case of consciousness, we have nothing, zilch, that's a technical term, worthy of being called a research program, nor are there any substantive proposals about how to go about starting one. Researchers are stumped. Here's what the atheist philosopher John Searle has to say. Physical events can have only physical explanations, and consciousness is not physical. So consciousness plays no explanatory role whatsoever. If, for example, you think you ate because you were consciously hungry, or got married because you were consciously in love with your prospective spouse, or withdrew your hand from the flame because you consciously felt a pain, or spoke up at a meeting because you consciously disagreed with the main speaker, you are mistaken in every case. In each case, the effect was a physical event and therefore must have an entirely physical explanation. I'm not a naturalist because naturalism must appeal to ad hoc solutions. Now, when I say an ad hoc solution is a solution that you come up with to meet a problem. Your system doesn't contain within it a solution, and so you have to invent one or borrow one from somewhere else. And Richard Dawkins and Daniel Dennett have famously appealed to the idea of the meme, not those pictures you put on Facebook, but a concept. And here is Dawkins' scientific discovery of meme from the selfish gene. We need a name for the new replicator, a noun that conveys the idea of a unit of cultural transmission or a unit of imitation. Meme comes from a suitable Greek root, but I want a monosyllable that sounds a bit like gene. I hope my classicist friends will forgive me if I abbreviate meme to meme. If it is any consolation, it could alternatively be thought of as related to memory or to the French word meme. It should be pronounced to rhyme with cream. Now, this is hardly like Newton or Einstein. This is just strange, isn't it? Here's what Simon Conway Morris, who is Dawkins's, or at least was when Dawkins was the Simonyi professor of biology, charged with the task of public education at Oxford University. This is his counterpoint at Cambridge University, Simon Conway Morris. And here's what Morris has to say about memes. Memes are trivial, to be banished by simple mental exercises. In any wider context, they are hopelessly, if not hilariously, simplistic. So let me explain the meme very briefly to you. Briefly, a meme is an idea that is transmitted socially or culturally. And the idea that Dawkins and Dennett have is that ideas serve biological, evolutionary, Darwinistic purposes as well as biology does. And so that there was a time when a belief in God was useful evolutionarily. And again, that points out that beliefs don't have to be true in an evolutionary world. But now belief in God is not needed because we've advanced to a particular point, so just stop believing in God. Well, that's not how your genes work. You can't just change your genes by changing your mind. I was born with a genetic birth disorder. I was born with syndactylism. I had webbed fingers. I still have webbed toes. I'm a really good swimmer. But they had to operate on me. It wasn't a simple matter of just think differently. That'll change your genes. And that's Morris's point here, that you can't just change your mind about these things. At other times, they will talk about memes as though they were viruses, that you can catch a meme if you hang out with Christian people, you know. But viruses and genes are not remotely similar. And, so I'm very confused about this. When Dennett was on campus with us and Alistair McGrath pushed him for scientific evidence of the meme, Dennett's answer was, of course, I'll give you some scientific evidence. Read my article in the Oxford Dictionary of Biology. Well, I'm sorry, but bibliographies don't make for good science. Now, scientists read bibliographies and you can use them to report on research, but they're not the doing of science. And if all you have to prove a position scientifically is citing an article in a respected British publication, then I can prove the resurrection of Jesus because I wrote the article on the resurrection of Jesus in the Cambridge Dictionary of Christianity. Matter settled. Those are some of the reasons that I'm not an atheist, because those are the implications that follow from believing what they believe. An atheist can't live with those implications. And atheists don't live with those implications. Let me take the rest of the time to give you some practical strategies for talking to atheists. And I'm going to give you some general strategies, and I'm going to give you a few practical strategies that I find helpful. Take them, try them, use them. If they prove useful to you, keep doing them. If they don't, find something else. General strategies. Number one, listen and relate to them as people. Simple truth. Atheists are people too. Atheists need Jesus too. Jesus died for atheists. All right? Jesus loves them, and we ought to love them, and we ought to know and listen to them, not caricature their beliefs. Second, use their authorities. I think you may have noted, I've quoted quite a few atheists and agnostics this morning. The least that can happen is they say, well, that's not right. I say, well, take it up with Dawkins. He's your hero, not mine. So do that. Third, do not argue evolution or the age of the earth. I'm not saying those things are unimportant, but they're complicated, they're difficult, they divide Christians, and it's like trying to get to Baton Rouge from Montgomery by going through Australia. It's just not a fight that you have to have, and disproving naturalism is far simpler than taking up a scientific theory. If you're going to talk about science, focus on physics and cosmology. And I'll put an ad in here. Next month, February 21st and 22nd, we're having a great Greer Hurd Forum where William Lane Craig will debate Sean Carroll on cosmology. Is there cosmological evidence for the existence of God? And we've got world-class speakers, every one of them, present to talk on it. See more at GreerHurd.com. And then use questions. Questions linger with people, they bother people, and you can guide people with questions. So let me throw out a few strategies. Ask them if they freely don't believe in God. I say when I go on campuses, I ask that question. Ask them if they think they're rational and can reason their way to the truth on important issues. And then ask them how certain they are. And most people are really certain that I'm here because I chose to be. If I didn't want to be here, I would be somewhere else. Then ask them how this can be the case if naturalism, that is materialism, is true. And you can show them. I've cited atheists to show the implications of atheism, not Billy Graham, okay? And then ask them which they are more certain about. Materialism or their own freedom and rationality. Here's another strategy, kind of based off of a Pascal's wager sort of reasoning. Ask them how important the issue is. The issue being, is there a God or not? Which entails, is there life after death or not? Is there heaven or hell or not? Most atheists I know will say it's a really important issue. Virtually every atheist I know thinks that. Ask them if they believe in investigation and research, and they will. After all, they keep telling us we're free thinkers, we're rationalists, okay? Then ask them how they have investigated the question of God. Well, I got online and I went to Internet Infidels or infidels.org, or I read Richard Dawkins or Sam Harris, that sort of thing. Ask them if the intensity of their investigation has been proportional to the importance of the issue. Let me give you an example. I had to write a dissertation to complete my PhD. I decided that I would write on the intersection of philosophical hermeneutics and historical Jesus research. That meant that I needed to study particular things. So I took a year-long seminar in the philosophy of Jacques Derrida, which I wouldn't wish on anybody, but I did, because I knew that structuralism and post-structuralism and deconstruction would come into the question. I knew that structuralism would be a very important part of it, so I went to the University of Texas at Arlington, and I took a seminar from a man who studied with Claude Lévi-Strauss and wrote his dissertation on Lévi-Strauss. Well, historical Jesus research was going to be very important in that area, so I went to Oxford University and I studied with N.T. Wright. I put a lot of work into it, years of my life. And that was only my dissertation. It wasn't my eternal destiny. But notice what I did. I studied with experts who believe those things. And so I will challenge atheists, why don't you come study with me? I have a PhD in theology and philosophy, and I'm an expert, and I'm an advocate. Shouldn't you study that way if you're going to have integrity in your unbelief? So let me real quickly go through this third one, and we'll be done. Here's a third strategy. Ask them how old the universe is. Now, this is sort of a rope-a-dope strategy, okay? Now, frequently, most of the time I found, they will say that the universe is more than 13 billion years old because they think that when you're asking them that you think it's 10 to 20,000 years old. And they know that the scientific evidence indicates 13 billion years plus from Big Bang cosmology. We'll point out to them that if something has an age, any age at all, even 13.7 billion years is an age, then it has a beginning. And if something has a beginning, then it has a cause, or they're more mysterious than we are. They think something can pop into existence from nothing. Pop into existence for no reason at all. We don't think that the universe is uncaused. Read the Bible. In the beginning, God said, let there, we get there pretty quickly. And they've already agreed that the universe has a beginning. Therefore, the universe has a cause. Now, note, the cause is, this does not prove God exists. It's certainly not the Christian God, but the cause is consistent with the Christian view of God. And then I'd say this, note that the age of the universe is not the issue with this approach. The key is getting them to admit that the universe has an age, not arguing about what that age is. That's like arguing with Zsa Zsa Gabor about how old she is. So, I'm taking up all of my time, but it's been good to be here with you. I'd love to talk to you. I've got other strategies that I can share with you as well, but I'm grateful for Matt inviting me to be part of it again. Thank you.